My name is Ray Holloway, and for 22 years I pulled reefer loads out of Omaha for a small outfit that doesn't exist anymore on account of the old man who owned it passing away back in 2019 and his kids selling the trucks off one by one. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not some kid who got spooked on his first run and made up a story to sound interesting truck stop. I've seen a lot of country and I've seen a lot of weather and I've seen things you can explain and things you can't. And what I'm about to tell you falls firmly in the second category. This happened in the fall of 2011. On a load of frozen beef I was hauling from Omaha out to a distribution center just east of Salt Lake City. I picked the trailer up late around 4 o'clock in the afternoon on account of a delay at the packing house, and by the time I rolled across the Nebraska line into Wyoming, the sun was already gone and the temperature outside had dropped close to freezing. Now anybody who's run I-80 through southern Wyoming after dark knows what kind of road I'm talking about. It's flat. It's empty. The wind comes off the high plains hard enough to push your trailer sideways if you don't lean into it. And between Cheyenne and Rawlins you can drive 40 miles without seeing another set of tail lights. I was somewhere past Laramie pushing toward Elk Mountain when I saw the first one. A man walking on the right shoulder, headed the wrong way into oncoming traffic on my side. Older fella, brown work jacket, ball cap, pulled down low, one hand raised like he was flagging me down. I didn't even slow. I haven't picked up a hitchhiker since 1996, when a buddy of mine got cut up outside Reno by a guy who looked like somebody's granddad, and I gave that walker a wide berth and kept my speed steady. But here's where it started getting strange. When I checked my passenger mirror after I passed him, the shoulder was empty. No man walking, no man standing, no man at all. And the shoulder out there is flat, scrubland for half a mile in every direction. So there's nowhere a person could disappear to that fast. I told myself I was tired. I drank some cold coffee. I turned the radio up. 20 minutes later, maybe 15 miles further down the road, I saw him again. Same jacket, same cap, same hand up, walking the wrong way. I gripped that wheel a little tighter. And I'll be honest with you, I started talking to myself out loud, just narrating what I was seeing. Because that's what you do when you're alone in the cab and your mind starts playing tricks on you. I went past him again, checked the mirror, empty shoulder. By the third time I'd stopped being scared and started being angry. The way you get when something keeps poking at you and you've had enough. He was a quarter mile ahead, dead center. On the shoulder, hand up. I made up my mind I was going to stop and have a word with him. Prank or hallucination or whatever it was, I wanted it to end. I reached for my four-ways, and right then my CB crackled to life. A voice came through, clear as a bell. An older man's voice, calm and slow, and it said, "Don't stop, Ray. Whatever you do, don't you stop." I went cold all the way down to my boots, because I hadn't keyed the mic. I hadn't said my name on the radio in 3 weeks, and nobody who knew me would have been running that empty stretch of I-80 that hour. I keyed the mic back and I said, "Who is this? How do you know my name?" Nothing, just static. I tried again. "Come back on me, driver. Who am I talking to?" Static. A long, slow hiss, like wind through a Screen door. I didn't stop. I pressed that accelerator back down and I blew past the walker without even glancing at him, and I drove the 90 miles without blinking, both hands on the wheel, jaw clenched so tight I had a headache for 2 days. Afterward, when I rolled into the Little America truck stop just before 3 o'clock in the morning, I parked as far from the road as I could get, locked every door, climbed into the sleeper, and sat there with the dome light on until the sun came up. The next morning at breakfast I sat down across from an old hauler at the counter, fellow with a white beard and hands like leather, and I told him what I'd seen. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just stirred his coffee and he said, "You see the walker on Elk Mountain? On the flats before it," I said. He nodded slow. "Brown jacket? Ball cap? Hand up. That's him. Did you stop?" "No. Somebody on the CB told me not to." He looked up at me then, and his eyes were the kind of tired that only comes from a long life on the road. He said, "You're a lucky man. He shows up to the boys who are about to pull over where they shouldn't. Folks who stop for him don't always make it to morning. Folks who don't stop, they hear the voice always do. Same voice every time." I asked him who the voice was. He shrugged. "Some old driver, I figure. Somebody who's been out here longer than you and me. Somebody who knows the road." I looked it up later. Back in 1983, a Wyoming state trooper found a trucker dead in his cab at a pull-off near Elk Mountain Summit. No signs of foul play, no medical cause, just a man who'd parked his rig, locked the doors, and never woke up. The trooper's report mentioned an older man's body found about 100 yards away in the scrub. Brown work jacket, ball cap, no identification, and no obvious cause of death on him either. The case is still open. I've driven that stretch of I-80 maybe 400 times since that night, and I have never once seen the walker again. But I'll tell you this much. I never run that road after midnight anymore. And when my CB crackles out of nowhere, I do exactly what the voice tells me. And I don't ask questions. The next one I want to tell you about happened to a friend of mine, woman by the name of Diane Pruitt. And she told it to me herself one night over coffee at the TA in Effingham, Illinois, with her hands wrapped around the mug like she was trying to warm them from the inside out. Diane drove team with her husband for almost a decade before he passed. And after the funeral, she kept on hauling solo because she said the road was the only place that still felt like home. Her story took place in East Texas on a 2-lane state road she'd taken as a shortcut to deliver a hot load of auto parts to a plant outside Tyler. She'd been driving 4 hours straight through that thick, wet, southern night, where the fog hangs low over the fields and the cicadas are loud enough to hear through a closed window. And somewhere around 11:30, she passed a small farmhouse on the right side of the road. She told me she remembered it clear as day because it looked so out of place. White paint glowing in the fog. Wraparound porch with a swing on it. Single yellow porch light burning against the dark. She said, "Brother," I thought to myself, "somebody lives well out here. Quiet, pretty, nothing for miles. I take a place like that in a heartbeat." She kept driving. About 40 minutes later, her GPS sent her down a road that dead-ended at a closed bridge, which is the kind of thing that happens more than you'd think when you trust a satellite to navigate East Texas. So, she found a wide gravel pull-off, swung the rig around, checked her route on the paper atlas she always kept in the door pocket, and started heading back the way she came, expecting to pass that little white farmhouse on her left this time. But she didn't. She drove the same exact stretch of road, the same pine forest, the same fog, the same cicadas, and there was no farmhouse, no driveway, no mailbox. No porch light. Nothing but trees pressed right up to the shoulder. She slowed down. She stopped. She backed up half a mile, watching the right side, the left side, both sides, and there was nothing there. She told me she sat in that idling truck for 10 minutes trying to figure out if she'd lost her mind. She finished the delivery in Tyler at 6 o'clock in the morning, and on her way back out, she drove that same stretch a third time in full daylight with the sun burning the last of the fog off the asphalt. No farmhouse. No clearing. Not even a break in the tree line where one could have stood. About 10 miles up the road, she pulled into a little gas station, the kind with one pump and a screen door, and she went inside and bought a coffee from the old man behind the counter, and she asked him, real casual, if there used to be a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch along that stretch of road. The old man went still. He set down the rag he'd been wiping the counter with, and he looked at her for a long moment, and he said, "Ma'am, what time of night did you see it?" "Around," she said. He nodded like that was the answer he'd been expecting. He said, "That house burned down in November of 1968. Family of 4 inside. Father, mother, 2 little girls. Wasn't an accident. Neither. But they never caught who did it." Diane felt her stomach turn over. "Then how did I see it?" The old man shrugged, and he gave her a sad sort of smile, and he said, "You ain't the first. About one driver every couple of years comes in here asking me the same question. Always around this time of year. Always between 11 and 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why it shows itself, ma'am. I don't know why it picks the people it picks. But if it was me, I'd say a prayer for that family tonight, because I figure that's all they're really asking for." Diane told me she finished her coffee, paid for her breakfast, climbed back in her rig, and she did exactly what the old man said. She prayed for that family the whole 80014:26 me home. She told me she's never taken a shortcut through East Texas since. Not because she's scared of the house, but because she doesn't trust herself to drive past it again without stopping. And stopping, she said, is the one thing the old man warned her never to do. Now, I want to tell you about a fella named Mike Devereaux. Big guy out of Pennsylvania. Played college ball at Pitt back in the late 90s. The kind of man who isn't easily rattled by anything. Mike pulls flatbed, mostly steel coils and construction equipment. And he told me this story over a plate of eggs at a pilot in Gary, Indiana, that he barely touched the whole time he was talking. A trucker who won't eat his breakfast is a trucker who's still living inside whatever he's about to tell you. And that's how I knew it was real. Mike was hauling a load of steel out of Pittsburgh, headed for a job site in eastern Ohio. And he was right at the edge of his hours of service when he saw the sign for an old rest area off I-70. He pulled in, figuring he'd grab his 10 and roll out at dawn. Now, this rest area was one of those forgotten ones the state hasn't touched since the 80s. 1 concrete building, 2 vending machines, 12 truck spaces around the back with weeds growing up through the cracks. When he pulled in around 11 o'clock at night, there were 2 other rigs. Parked there, both dark, curtains drawn, drivers presumably asleep. Mike did his walk around, climbed into the sleeper, pulled his curtain, and was out within 10 minutes. He doesn't know exactly what time he woke up. His phone was charging on the dash, and he didn't want to climb out to check. But he figures it was somewhere between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. What woke him up was a sound. 3 slow taps on his passenger side door. Knuckles deliberate, soft. A pause. Then 3 more. He told me, "Brother." My first thought wasn't fear. My first thought was, somebody's having engine trouble and needs a jump. I'm a big guy. I don't get scared of knocks on the door. So, I pulled the curtain back just a hair, just enough to peek out the passenger window. There was a woman standing next to his truck. Hospital scrubs, the pale green kind. Hospital ID badge clipped to the front of her shirt. Her hair was wet, hanging flat against her face, like she just walked out of a shower or a river. Her arms were at her sides, perfectly still. She was looking up at the window, right at him, even though the curtain was drawn and there was no way she should have known he was there. Her face didn't move, didn't blink, didn't change. Mike said, "It wasn't fear yet. It was confusion. There was no car in that lot that wasn't a semi. There's no hospital within 30 miles of that rest area. And there's no reason for a woman in wet scrubs to be standing next to my truck at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of Ohio." He didn't roll the window down. He didn't say anything. He just watched her, and she watched him back. After about 10 seconds, she raised her right hand very slowly and tapped the door again. 3 slow taps. Same rhythm. Same spot. And that's when Mike realized something that, in his own words, took 10 years off his life. Her hand had been hanging at her side the entire time he'd been watching her, which meant whoever had been tapping the door before she raised her arm hadn't been her. He let the curtain drop. He scrambled forward into the driver's seat as quiet as he could. He fired the engine without bothering with the air pressure, without the lights, without the seatbelt. He was already rolling out of that space when he finally checked his mirrors. And when he did, the woman was gone. The other 2 trucks were still dark. Curtains still drawn. Mike told me, "I don't know if those other drivers were asleep. I don't know if they were even alive." I drove the rest of that load straight through, took the violation on my logbook, and when I got home, I looked the rest area up online. He found a handful of old forum posts. Other drivers going back to the mid-90s describing almost exactly the same encounter. Woman in green scrubs, wet hair, 3 slow taps on the passenger door, always between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning. Nobody knows who she was. There was a small county hospital that used to operate about 15 miles north of that rest area. Shut down in 1987 after a fire in the surgical wing killed 4 staff members and 2 patients. The records from that fire are sealed. Mike doesn't sleep at unfamiliar rest areas anymore. He says if he can't make a proper truck stop with lights and a fence and other people moving around, he'd rather take the fine and park on a ramp where at least the highway patrol will check on him before anything else does. The 4th driver I want to tell you about goes by the handle Big Country on the CB. But his real name is Earl Whitfield, and he runs flatbed out of Birmingham, Alabama. I've known Earl for 15 years, and he doesn't tell ghost stories, which is exactly why the one he told me last spring stuck with me the way it did. He was running a load of mining equipment up into West Virginia coal country on a route that took him along some of the oldest blacktop in the eastern half of this country. Roads where the trees lean in over the asphalt and form a green tunnel that doesn't let much daylight through even at noon. Earl told me his GPS had been acting up all day, recalculating every few miles, sending him downside routes that didn't make sense for a truck his size. At one point, telling him he was driving through the middle of a lake when he was clearly on dry pavement. He didn't think much of it. GPS gets weird in the mountains. Everybody knows that. But as the sun went down and he got deeper into the hollers, the recalculations started happening more often, and the routes it was suggesting started getting stranger. Around 9 o'clock at night, he came to a fork in the road that wasn't on any map, a narrow paved road branching off to the right that his GPS was now insisting he take even though his trip planner had told him to stay straight. He sat at that fork idling for almost a full minute. He told me, Brother, what spooked me wasn't the road. It was the fact that there was no sign, no route number, no town name, nothing. Just blacktop going off into the trees. And out in the mountains, every road has a sign. Even the bad ones, even the ones nobody uses anymore. The county puts a marker up. That's the law. He stayed straight. His GPS started screaming at him to make a U-turn. Kept screaming for 20 miles. Then, all at once, the screen went black for a moment. And when it came back on, it told him he was 37 miles south of where he actually was, in a town he'd never heard of, on a road that didn't exist on any other map he owned. He pulled over at the next wide spot, killed the engine, and sat there in the dark listening to the silence of the mountains. Now, anybody who's been up there will tell you about that silence. It isn't really silence at all. It's the absence of the noises you expect. No insects, no wind, no distant traffic, nothing. While he was sitting there trying to make sense of his screen, his CB clicked on by itself, which shouldn't have been possible because he hadn't keyed the mic. And a voice came through, flat, slow, and emotionless, like an old man reading from a phone book. And it just said a string of numbers. Earl grabbed a fuel receipt off the dash and started writing them down as fast as he could. Long groups of them. Too long to be coordinates. Too structured to be random. The voice stopped after about 30 seconds and the CB went quiet again. He never heard it speak after that. He eventually got his GPS working, found his way back to the route he was supposed to be on, and delivered his load only 3 hours late, which his dispatcher chalked up to the mountains. But here's the part that got him. About a month later, he was running the same route in reverse. And when he came to the spot where that mysterious fork had been, the one with no sign and no name, there was no fork there. The road just continued straight. Solid trees on both sides. No evidence that any pavement had ever branched off into the woods at that location. He stopped the truck, got out, walked the shoulder for 100 yards in both directions. Daylight, full sun, clear view, no fork. He showed the numbers from the fuel receipt to his son, who works for a software company in Atlanta. His son stared at them for a long time and then he said, "Dad, these aren't coordinates. These look like timestamps, like dates and times. But the years are wrong. They're all in the future." Earl asked him how far in the future. His son said, "Some of them are next year. Some of them are 20 years out. And one of them is your birthday." Earl still has that fuel receipt tucked into his visor. He still drives that route once a month. He hasn't told me what date is written on it, and I haven't asked because some questions you don't want answered. There's a stretch of those mountains up near the old logging camps where the locals say the roads drift. They mean it literally. Roads that were there yesterday aren't there today. Roads that nobody built show up overnight and lead somewhere they shouldn't. The Cherokee called that part of the country a place where the world wears thin. Earl doesn't talk about it much, but he keeps his CB on and he doesn't take unmarked roads anymore no matter what the GPS tells him to do. The fifth one is about a young driver named Carlos Mendez who'd been on the road about 3 years when this happened to him out of a yard in Fontana, California. He was running drive-in east on Interstate 10 headed for Phoenix with a load of warehouse goods, and he'd hit that long empty stretch through the desert east of Indio where there isn't much except sand and wind turbines and the occasional rest area that looks like it was built in 1972 and forgotten about ever since. It was past midnight. He was the only set of headlights on the road for miles in either direction. He had a Mexican radio station playing soft on the dash. Some old ranchera music his grandfather used to listen to back in Sonora, and he was sipping a cold energy drink and counting down the mile markers to the Arizona line. That's when he started hearing it. A child crying. He told me at first, "Brother, I thought it was the wind." The wind in that desert can sound like all kinds of things, especially through a cracked window. But my windows were up, AC was running, and the sound was inside the cab. He turned the radio down. The crying got louder, soft, rhythmic. The way a small child cries when they've been crying for a long time and don't have much energy left. He told me he gripped that steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. And he started talking to himself out loud. Just narrating the road, the mile markers, what he was seeing in his headlights. Because he needed to hear a voice he knew was his own. The crying seemed to be coming from the sleeper behind him. But every time he glanced in the little mirror that lets him see back there, the sleeper was empty. Curtain pulled back. Bed made exactly the way he'd left it that morning. After about 10 minutes of it, he couldn't take the silence between the sobs anymore, and he said out loud in Spanish, "¿Quién está ahí? ¿Qué quieres?" which is roughly, "Who's there? What do you want?" And the crying stopped, just stopped, mid-sob, like somebody had cut the recording. And then a voice, a little girl's voice, very small, very close, right behind his right ear, whispered back to him in Spanish, "Tengo frío. I'm cold." He told me he didn't stop. He made a deal with himself that he was not going to stop. Not for fuel, not for food, not for any reason until he saw the lights of Phoenix on the horizon. He drove with the dome light on. He drove with both hands on the wheel. He drove past 3 rest areas without slowing down. He didn't hear the voice again, but somewhere around Quartzsite, with about 90 miles still to go, he felt something rest very gently against the back of his right shoulder, like a small hand. He didn't look. He didn't move. He kept driving. The pressure stayed there for maybe 20 miles. Then it was gone. When he finally pulled into the truck stop on the east side of Phoenix just before dawn, he sat in the parking lot for almost an hour before he had the courage to climb back into the sleeper and check it. There was nothing there. Of course there was nothing there, but his pillow was damp, like somebody had been resting their head on it while it was wet. He stripped the bedding, threw it in the dumpster behind the truck stop, and bought new sheets at a Walmart that afternoon. Carlos told his grandmother about it the next time he was home. She crossed herself. And she told him that stretch of desert east of Indio used to be part of an old migrant trail back in the 30s and 40s. And that a lot of people died out there in the heat trying to make it across. A lot of children. She said, "The desert doesn't forget." And she made him carry a small saint's medal in his shirt pocket every time he runs that road after dark. He says he hasn't heard the voice again, but he leaves the dome light on every single time because he says darkness is what it wants, and he's not going to give it to it. The last one I want to leave you with tonight came from an old hauler named Wendell Garrison, who I met one rainy afternoon at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Wendell was the oldest active driver I'd ever talked to, early 70s, still pulling steady miles with a voice like gravel rolling around in a coffee can, and hands so weathered they looked carved out of oak. He told me his story happened back in 1986, before GPS, before cell phones, before half the things we take for granted now. When a driver out on the road was about as alone as a human being could be. He was running a tanker load of milk from a dairy outside Madison, Wisconsin, down to a processing plant in Missouri on a route that took him through some empty country in eastern Iowa late at night. The kind of country where you can drive 40 minutes between one set of farmyard lights and the next. He picked up a hitchhiker. He told me right away, "I know what you're thinking, son. You don't pick up hitchhikers." I didn't either. I never had before that night, and I never did again after. But this fella, he was different. I don't expect that to make sense to you, but it's the truth. The man was standing at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere, where there shouldn't have been anybody at all. Older gentleman, maybe 65, dressed in a brown suit jacket that looked like something out of a different decade, holding a small leather suitcase in his right hand, the kind men used to carry when they traveled by train. He wasn't waving. He wasn't even looking at the road. He was just standing at the edge of the gravel shoulder, facing the intersection, like he was waiting for somebody he expected to recognize. Wendell told me he doesn't know why he stopped. He'd driven past 100 hitchhikers in his career and never so much as touched his brake pedal for any of them. But something about this man, the suit, the suitcase, the calm of him standing there in the middle of nowhere at 1 o'clock in the morning, made Wendell ease off the throttle and roll that tanker to a stop about 20 yards past the intersection. The man walked up to the passenger's side at an unhurried pace, climbed into the cab without a word, set the suitcase on the floorboard between his feet, closed the door softly and said, "Thank you kindly. I won't be going far." Wendell pulled back onto the road. He told me the inside of that cab got cold the moment the man climbed in. Not air-conditioned cold, something else. The kind of cold you feel when you walk past an open freezer at a grocery store. He turned the heater up 2 notches, and the man didn't seem to notice one way or the other. They rode in silence for about 10 minutes. Wendell finally asked him where he was headed. The man looked straight ahead through the windshield, and he said, "Just up the road a piece. I'll know it when I see it." Wendell told me that's when he started feeling uneasy for the first time because there was nothing up the road. He'd run that route 100 times. There were no houses for the next 20 miles, no gas stations, no farms with their lights on, just corn on the left and corn on the right, and the white line ticking by in the headlights. He asked the man, just to make conversation, where he'd come from. The man was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "From a place I don't expect I'll be going back to." Wendell didn't ask anything else after that. They drove another 15 minutes in silence, and then with no warning, the man said, "Wendell, your daughter is going to be all right." Wendell told me his hands locked up on the wheel. He hadn't said his name. He hadn't said one word about his family. His daughter, his only child, was 16 years old at the time and back home in Wisconsin recovering from a car accident that had happened 3 days before he left on that run. She'd been in the hospital for 2 nights and had just come home the morning he climbed into his rig. There was no way, no possible way, for that man to know any of it. Wendell said, "How do you know my name, mister?" The man didn't answer. He just kept looking straight ahead. After another minute, he said very gently, "She'll walk with a slight limp the rest of her life, but she'll marry a good man, and she'll give you 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl, and the girl will be named after your mother. Don't worry about her anymore. She's past the part that was going to hurt." Wendell told me he didn't know what to say to any of that. He kept driving because he didn't know what else to do. About 5 miles further down the road, the man said, "This will be fine right here. You can let me off at that gas station up ahead on the right." Wendell looked up the road. There was no gas station. He'd been driving that stretch for years. There was nothing on either side but corn. But as he came around a slight bend, his headlights caught the edge of a small building set back from the road. An old single-pump gas station with a hand-painted sign and 1 week yellow bulb burning over the door. Wendell had never seen it before in his life, and he has never seen it since on any of the hundreds of trips he's made down that stretch of road in the 38 years since that night. He pulled the tanker over. The man picked up his suitcase, opened the door, and stepped down onto the gravel. Before he closed the door, he paused, and he looked back up into the cab, and he said, "Wendell, your wife is going to go before you, a long time from now. October, the year you turn 68. It will be quick, and she won't be afraid. Be there with her and tell her what you need to tell her. That's the only thing I came to say." And then he closed the door and walked off into the dark behind the gas station. And Wendell sat there with the engine running and his hands shaking on the wheel for the better part of 20 minutes before he could bring himself to put the truck back in gear. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't sleep much the next night either. When he got home at the end of that run, he sat his wife down at the kitchen table, and he told her everything because he didn't know how to carry it by himself. She listened to the whole thing without saying a word. When he was done, she got up, she kissed him on the forehead, and she told him not to pick up any more hitchhikers, ever, for the rest of his natural life, which he never did. His daughter recovered. She walked with a slight limp from that day forward. She married a good man named Thomas in 1993. She gave Wendell 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl. The girl was born in 1998, and his daughter named her Margaret, after Wendell's mother, without ever knowing that her father had been told that name 12 years earlier on a dark road in Iowa by a stranger in a brown suit. Wendell told me his wife passed away in October of 2017, the year he turned 68. It was quick. She wasn't afraid. He was there with her, and he told her what he needed to tell her, just like the man had said. He sat across from me in that booth in West Memphis with the rain running down the window behind him, and he wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, and he said, "Son, I've thought about that man every single day for almost 40 years. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he was. I don't know why he stopped at that crossroads and waited for me, of all the drivers in the world, to come along and pick him up. But I'll tell you what I've come to believe. I don't think he was there to scare me. I don't think he was there to warn me. I think he was there to be kind. I think somebody somewhere decided I'd earned the right to know what was coming, so I wouldn't waste the years I had left being afraid of the wrong things. And every night since my wife passed, before I climb into the sleeper, I say a little thank you out loud, just in case he can hear me, just in case he's still out there somewhere, riding along with somebody else who needs to hear what he came to say." Wendell finished his coffee. He tipped his cap to the waitress. He shook my hand, and he walked out into that West Memphis rain to climb back up into his rig and head west on I-40. And I sat at that table for a long time after he was gone, watching the tail lights of his trailer disappear into the storm. So, I'll leave you with this tonight, brothers and sisters. The road is older than any of us. It was here before our trucks, before our highways, before the white lines and the mile markers and the truck stops with their hot coffee and their fluorescent lights. And it'll be here long after we're all gone. There are things out there on those dark stretches between the towns that don't answer to maps and don't answer to clocks and don't answer to the kind of explanations that satisfy a man in daylight. Some of them mean you harm. Some of them mean you nothing at all. And a few of them, if Wendell is right, mean you a kindness you won't understand until years later. So keep your CB on. Keep your doors locked. Don't stop where you weren't planning to stop. And if somebody you don't know calls you by your name out of the dark, you listen carefully to what they have to say because you may not get the chance to hear it twice. Drive safe out there. We'll see you on the next one.